in an ideal world, the sales team would want to meet the bosses themselves,
Yeah.
and that doesn't always happen. Some people want to hold control. Some people, the managers, don't want to meet up with the people just because they want to keep that level of separation. How do you coach someone who's going to run into the dragon's den, I guess, well,
Yeah.
Shark Tank in the US, and try to sell something that they've never sold before? They've actually never sold anything before. So how do you coach them? Is that just sending an email ahead of time, tell them these are the good stuff about us, or do you sit with them for hours and talk about it? Because it might take hours.
Yeah, so it's a really great question, and there's no perfect answer to that, which may change from situation to situation. However, there's a framework that I advocate that I've come up with in the book. And speaking of sharks, I call it Deep Sea. It's an acronym, of course, which stands for Discover, Engage, Equip, Personalize, and then Coach. Right. So it's all about how to work with that champion to go out and engage properly with the different stakeholders. And in fact, the question you raised is the main reason that I started the company that I did, because time after time, the champion would go and they wouldn't know how to personalize the pitch to different people. They wouldn't know how to explain what we do effectively. And it just wasn't very effective. And so by putting an automated product demonstration, and that's a kind of a loaded term, by the way, because I actually have a philosophy that there are 6 different types of demos that buyers go through or need to go through in a buying process. So I'll use that word demo loosely. But by doing that, you're basically placing yourself as their proxy for you. So instead of them going and having to speak, because you're using video or screen recordings is what they really are, then that can kind of speak for you. So Gartner has this research that shows that buyers are spending less time with the vendor in person. And so if you think about all this time between these gaps, between the time you meet with the buyer and the time you meet with them again, we have this concept of selling in the gap. And so what can you give them between those times? Because during that time, they go talk to all their stakeholders, right? They're going and talking to these other people. And a lot of times you don't even know what they're doing. So there's this issue of visibility. There's this issue of making sure they have the right amount. So getting back to your original question, how do you equip them effectively and how do you coach them? First of all, you have to understand who they're going to, what that role is all about. You have to understand what that role's primary concerns and questions are going to be, which you should, or at least people on your sales team should, because they've been through it before. And you've got to understand at what stage they are, so you give them the right kind of content. And so there are a couple of ways to do this. If they're going to go in and have that conversation, sometimes it's simply a matter, an email that says, hey, I understand you're going to go talk to your boss. Your boss is let's say a CMO. And when CMOs get involved, they typically want to know answers to these questions. So you have just kind of a list of what might be considered objections or FAQs, which are really just kind of the same thing, but FAQs are more you're just anticipating the questions that are going to come up. And so you give them this list and you say, these are the kinds of things that they're going to ask you. So you need to be prepared. And if possible, you send that ahead of them meeting and even have a call with them and coach them through it. And another thing that you can do, there was a really good example I put in the book. HubSpot has this guide, not advocating HubSpot per se, but they did this guide on how to sell HubSpot to your CFO. So there's a deck. There's actually a deck of slides you can download, and that's another thing that you can provide. So there are many different types of content that you can provide your champion to go sell effectively for you, and it really depends on what the situation is. If they're going to present in front of a group of executives or something, or to a team, a deck is really great. And so we do that in our own company, as we have a deck that we send to the champion, so it helps them have some slides that they can use or tweak or things like that. So we call that the ultimate buying guide. And the goal there is, again, to equip them with something that they can be more effective with.